Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me how. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, let's do it now. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, you're the one that makes fishing so much fun. Well, hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what I need to raise a big old honking moss back. Line breaking, tack tearing up moss back. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for this podcast brought to you by Purina Mills, makers of Aquamax Fish Foods, the best lineup of fish foods on the market for what you and I do with these special ponds and lakes. Also, Texas Hunter Products. Appreciate those guys. They make outstanding fish feeders. Easy Docks, David Schneiderman, Easy Docks of Texas. And guess what? Outdoor Water Solutions, hanging out with John Redd today. Today we're going to talk about aerating ponds and ideas and tips for you. Welcome, John Redd.
Glad to be here. Glad to be here.
Yeah, let's talk about aerating ponds. I mean, that's something you know a little bit about. Yeah.
Yeah. We've been in the business. There's just some background real quick. We started the company in 2005, and we started out in aeration, and we've just continued to add to the product line and to the mix since then. So we've been in the market for 16 years. And but yeah, aeration is a key part of our product lineup, and what's kind of unique and interesting about our company is that we offer a lot of different ways to aerate. So a lot of companies out there are primarily electric, but we also have wind and solar and electric, all three together.
Now, remember when you guys started up, your primary focus was windmills, wind aeration, wind generated aeration. Tell us, kind of give everybody a little bit of the backstory on that niche. What kind of motivated you to do that?
Well, we started out initially distributing another company's products in wind, and decided after a couple of years that there was a much better way to do that. So we more or less redesigned their system and filed for patents on it, and basically made it a lot better. So the reason we're intrigued with wind is I grew up on a farm in Missouri, and we've got a lot of ponds, but we don't have electricity close to a lot of those ponds. So how do you aerate? And I know we'll talk more about aeration, but how do you aerate a pond that may be quarter mile or half mile away from electricity, other than spending a whole lot of money to run power to that? So,
you bet.
So wind was intriguing. We designed a system that could put out 3 times more air and was a lot more dependable. A much bigger compressor. We put a 5-year warranty on that compressor. So just a much better system, and that's kind of how we started getting into the business.
And you know, when you start, it's kind of fun because when you start talking about people or talking to people about wind-driven aeration, they say, well, when the wind's not blowing, that's when we need it the most. Is that a fair statement or no?
I think it in some cases, yes. If you've got a pond that you know is heavily stocked with fish, and you're concerned about, that July, August time frame when you may be in a low wind condition, then yeah, you probably need supplemental aeration, and it may be electric or it may be solar. Wind may not always be the answer, but 90% of the ponds that where people use our system, I mean, it's just a recreational pond. It may be a farm pond, it may be just a fishing pond, swimming pond, and they've got fish in there, but it's not stocked so heavy that they're really looking at a fish kill.
That's very interesting. So now let's talk a little bit about the science behind aerating ponds. What's the theory behind it? Why does a pond even need to be aerated?
So every pond over time starts to age, and as a pond ages, you get what you call eutrophication. So we've all driven around and seen an old pond that's full of moss and algae. It's starting to grow trees and willows, and that's because the pond at one time may have been 15 feet deep, but it's built up over 30, 40, 50 years with muck on the bottom, and it's eutrophication. So it's basically the aging of a pond. Through aeration, our goal is to prevent that from taking place. So we take a pond that is typically anaerobic, which means not a lot of oxygen. We're adding oxygen, which makes it aerobic, and anything aerobic is a lot more active microbes than anaerobic. So if you go to a wastewater treatment plant, they're churning out water, they're trying to make it aerobic. So by adding oxygen to a pond, we're changing it from anaerobic to aerobic, and by doing that, we're adding oxygen, adding aerobic bacteria, and that starts to break down a lot of that nutrients on the bottom, that black muck on the bottom, and the things that cause a pond to age. And the other thing you see is as a pond starts to age, you start seeing a lot more moss and algae in it, and that's because that nutrients, that black muck on the bottom, is releasing primarily phosphorus, but also some nitrogen. That's feeding your algae, that's feeding your weeds, and so anything we can do to get oxygen back in that pond is going to make a huge difference.
So aeration is designed as much to move water as it is to add oxygen.
Correct.
Now, with the windmill, let's just kind of paint a verbal picture of that. The windmill, this looks just like a windmill you'd see that's pumping water on a farm or a ranch. Right? But in your case, you've got a patented compressor that sits up by the fan blades, that when the fan blades turn, it turns that compressor, which pushes air through a one-way valve, goes out into a tube, into the pond, into a diffuser that sits on the bottom, and bubbles cascade up that look like Alka-Seltzer.
Right.
Are there other ways to aerate a pond?
Well, there are a lot of ways to aerate a pond.
So this is bottom-diffused aeration.
This is bottom-diffused aeration. So let's talk about bottom-diffused aeration first.
Okay.
So your predominant way to aerate to the bottom is going to be electric. So you plug in an electric aerator, which is a compressor, and you run your air line and your diffusers. And that's the most popular, and that's because people have power. And if you can aerate 24/7, we recommend it. Okay. Second, we've talked about is the wind. And again, that works great for maybe a remote location, or just maybe a location where you don't want to spend money on electricity. You want to use nature.
Because you might be spending $40,000 to get power to the pond.
You could be. Or you could be spending, $50 or $100 a month just to run your compressors. So let's use the wind.
Yes.
So that's an alternative. And, some ponds we may put 2 or 3 systems on just to get more airflow. And then the third option, of which we have spent a lot of time developing over the last 5 or 6 years, is solar. So we have several different solar aeration options. We have a direct drive system, which basically runs during the daytime hours, and then we have a battery backup system. And basically, if you're in areas with not a lot of wind and you have a lot of sun, let's just say you're in the Carolinas or maybe Florida or something like that, a lot more sun than wind, so let's take advantage of the sun. So we'll offer solar aeration in those instances. And again, those are the predominant ways. Now, some people with heavily stocked ponds may use a surface aerator, and that just boils the water at the surface, which can add oxygen and help keep the fish alive, especially on a heavily stocked situation. But so that's another potential option. Some people decide to put fountains in, the big fountains that shoot up in the air.
Sure.
They look great, they work great, but those really are not designed for aeration per se. I mean, they can help aerate a shallow pond, but if you've got a 2-acre, 3-acre pond and it's 10, 12 feet deep, it's mainly for aesthetics.
So here's what happens. In the summertime, ponds stratify. In the spring of the year, April, May, early June, depending on where you are in the nation, the sun's heat and extended daylight hours push heat into the water, but that heat wants to rise. So you end up with what is effectively like a layer cake. You have a warm layer of water sitting on top of a cooler layer of water. In the middle, there's a dividing line that's called the thermocline. Well, with the different types of aeration, they serve a different purpose. So like what John's talking about with bottom-diffused aeration, it's to move water in a vertical method where the winds move it horizontally. So these bubble plumes push the water up. There's only 2 ways oxygen can get absorbed into the water or dissolved into the water. That is contact with the atmosphere or from photosynthesis from the respiration, from plants. Photosynthesis creates oxygen for water. So that's how dissolved oxygen gets into the water. So what the aeration systems do is they expedite nature by pushing the water up where it can communicate with the surface. So with these bottom-diffused aeration systems, they do it with bubble plumes moving up. Fountains draft water shallow, so they're drafting it typically above the thermocline, so they're not mixing that lower layer of water. Right. Then there's a third kind of aeration called circulators, which moves water horizontally. It can move it diagonally. It can move bottom water up with a fan that basically moves the water instead of using air to move the water. You know, so now one of the questions I've got, John, is you started off, the backbone of your business was with wind-driven aeration. Then you got more into the solar part, all the while you were developing your electric-powered systems. Right. Do those things, can you have like a solar-powered with a windmill that counteract off each other? I know that you've got wind-driven aeration, but if there's power by the pond, you can use the wind-driven. When the wind quits blowing, the compressor kicks on. Right. So take us through how those systems work and how do they complement each other. So
yeah, you can have multiple systems on a pond. I mean, again, a lot of people prefer electric if they've got power, just because it gives them a 24/7 option. But if they want to potentially save some money, they can put a wind system in, and we actually have a controller that when the wind is blowing, we use the wind power. When the wind stops, it will turn on that electric system. So it's basically complementing each other and helping get you 24/7 aeration, but not always using electric power to do that. Conversely, we also have some people that decide they want to put a solar in and maybe a wind in. Again, they're maybe in a remote pond. They don't have access to power.
Like the mountains in Colorado.
Yep. And you know, on days that maybe they don't have much wind, they have a lot of sun. Usually your windier days are cloudy. And on days where they've got a lot of wind, they may not have a lot of sun. So we do complementary systems as well with a combination of solar and wind. There are a few people that do solar and electric, but usually one just complements the other.
Got it. So now, do you think about, when you got these methods, these systems, but do you think about strategies? Like we're sitting here on a beautiful lake in the middle of Missouri, 30-acre lake at Angry Beaver Ranch. We're analyzing the lake today. So we thought we'd have a conversation about aeration. There's an aeration system, or what's here? Let's do that.
Okay. So about probably 7 years ago, we put in 4 systems. So they were basically 3/4 horsepower compressors. We put 4 in. And off of those 4 systems, we have 12 double diffuser plates. And those are sitting in about 25 to 30 feet of water.
And there's water out here as deep as 40 feet.
There is.
This is an old pit where they harvested materials and sold them like a mine. So should you aerate, or can you aerate that 40-foot water? Should you? What should people watching this video or listening to this podcast, should they aerate in water that deep, 40 feet deep? Or is there a strategy with your 25-foot idea?
You know, I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer to that. I've got some customers that want to aerate the whole body of water, and then we've got some customers that want to aerate, you know, the majority of the water. I would say in a pond like this or a lake like this, we're trying to keep it around 30 feet, and that gives us a huge amount of area that's aerated. But at the same time, we've got a small area at the bottom that's not being aerated. So some of that depends on what type of species of fish. You know, if you've got warm water fish, it really doesn't matter. If you're running some cold water fish, if you're running northern pike, muskie, trout, some of those things, you may want that cold layer on the bottom.
You bet. You bet. So there is a strategy involved in that you want to think about when you're trying to choose the right system. You need to know your goals. Then you need to understand your water chemistry. You need to understand your water biology and the age of the pond, how much siltation is there. There's a number of variables that you need to think about when you get ready to design that system. Like I live in Texas. Right. Largemouth bass, they can't stand water warmer than about 84 or 85 degrees. I have found that if we aerate the entire water column in parts of Texas in lakes less than about 15 feet deep, that we're causing the water temperature to go up. So what we do there is we have our clients put them on timers from like 9 at night till 9 in the morning. So they're not running during that hottest part of the day, shoving that really hot water at the surface all the way to the bottom. and that keeps the water temperature down in the lower 80s, which that seems to have a pretty big impact on that fishery.
Right.
Which means the bigger bass don't die. That's what that means.
Right.
So we do use some strategy with those systems. So if somebody calls you, John, and they're in Iowa that heard this podcast and they want to talk to you, they live right on the edge of a corn farm. They've got a 3/4 acre pond right behind the house. The deer love to come drink in it. Mm-hmm. They stocked it with bass 4 years ago. The water's got kind of a bloom where the water looks green. They can see down about 2 feet. How would you counsel them? And they've got power to the pond. Yeah. What would you tell them they needed to do?
How deep was the pond again?
12 feet deep.
12 feet.
I just made that up, by the way.
Yep. No, on a pond like that, depending on what their objectives are. But if they're trying to help prevent the eutrophication, the buildup of the muck on the bottom, they're trying to prevent, a pond turnover situation, which we haven't talked about pond turnover, but a lot of times in the fall, your water starts to cool down, and you can get a front coming through with cold air and rain, and a pond can physically turn over. What happens is that top third of the pond, which is oxygen rich, now gets diluted with the bottom 2/3, which has no oxygen, and you can end up with a very low oxygen condition, and you can have a fish kill. What we also saw in Iowa this winter is we had a lot of fish die under the ice because we had a thick layer of ice, we had some snowpack on it, couldn't get photosynthesis underneath, and when the ice melted off, a lot of the fish were dead.
So you had winter kill.
So we had a winter kill.
So what would the strategy be for that pond owner in Iowa that's subject to that, winter kill and a high nutrient load?
All right. So in that situation, we would definitely want to put, if he's got power, they would probably go with an electric aeration system. 3/4 acre pond, we could use a 1/4 horsepower unit, and probably one of our double disc diffusers would probably go in 10 to 12 feet of water. And we'd tell them once you turn that on and get the pond conditioned over the course of 4 or 5 days, then we'd probably just leave it on.
What's condition mean?
So what we don't want to do is we don't want to force a pond turnover the minute we've turned the system on, because we don't want to lose fish. So a lot of times we'll tell somebody run it, maybe 2 hours the first day, 4 hours the next day, 8 hours the next day, and maybe 12 or 16 hours the next day, and just phase it in over 3 to 5 days, again, so we don't flip that pond and end up losing fish in the process.
So we'll dig a little deeper into that. It's if you buy an aeration system and your pond is already stratified, which you've got that warm layer of water sitting on top of that cold layer of water, your cold layer of water has now run out of oxygen. Microbes have consumed it. Whatever consumes oxygen is going to take it out. Since it's not communicating with the atmosphere, there's no photosynthesis, it runs out of oxygen. So you got this cold, static, stagnant layer of water sitting there. And if you kick on your aeration system, you're going to push that dead water to the top. And you're going to mix it with your vibrant, healthy water at the surface, and that can cause a fish kill. So what you want to do is you want to eat that elephant one bite at a time. So what you do is you kick on the aeration system, regurgitate some of that bottom water up, let nature process it, turn the aeration system off, then do it again the next day, let it run a little longer, and give nature 5 or 6 days, 7 days to process that water that sits below the thermocline in order for it to cleanse itself. Then you can run the aeration system full time.
That would be correct.
Right?
And that's what we see with electrics. Now, a lot of times with the solar and the wind, because it's more intermittent aeration, you usually don't have to worry about the phase-in process as much. But once you go to the electric and you flip it on, it becomes more critical.
So would it be a fair statement to say that the solar power and the wind-driven power is kind of an insurance policy, whereas the system that can run 24/7 helps make it stable? It stabilizes that water more so than being kind of an insurance policy?
Yeah, I would say that the electric systems, because they can run 24/7, it's still an insurance policy, but you're getting the benefit of continuous aeration all the time.
So the water's autonomous. It's communicating. It's cleansing itself as fast as it can. But one thing to point out, that still doesn't guarantee there won't be a fish kill.
Right.
Because you've got a 60-year-old pond that's laden with nutrients, and those nutrients are pushed around, something's going to use those nutrients. So if you've got a heavy nutrient load, then you need to think about strategy. You may not want to start with it totally down on the very deepest part of the bottom of the pond.
You may release a lot of nutrients in there, which all of a
do
sudden,
it too fast. Yeah, so strategy is important. So you got strategy, you got to pick the right system, and then you can help make your pond healthy. You know, if you're going to push the envelope, try to grow more fish, or process more water, then it's real important that you pick the appropriate system for what it is that you're wanting to accomplish based on the conditions of that pond. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we haven't got into specifically, but if you're trying to grow big fish or a lot of fish, taking that third layer that's on the top and now making it the whole pond, I mean, there's just a lot of benefits to that. You've got a whole lot more oxygen in the water profile, water column. You're now aerobic instead of anaerobic. You've got potential for more phytoplankton. I mean, it basically can give your pond a lot more oxygen, which is good, than not doing anything at all. So you can help prevent the fish kills. You can help prevent the eutrophication and the age in the pond. You can help minimize some of the moss and the algae that's growing now because you're trying to break down some of those nutrients instead of releasing them to grow. And then you can potentially have more area, surface area, or more livable area for your fish. I mean, most of the biologists out there that you work with and that I work with are big proponents of aeration.
And they like it. I think one of the key points you just made was it suspends nutrients, breaks them down, and lets plankton take advantage of it, rather than leaving them bound in the soil in the bottom where rooted plants will take them up.
Right.
And then you're dealing with aquatic plants. How do they find you?
So we have a network of what we call elite dealers. So we basically try to work through a group of what we call full-service professional pond and lake management companies, and they sell our products, and that's the best way. And if they contact us, we can help provide information on the dealers within their market. So that's number one. Number two, if there is not any dealers in their specific area at all that we work through, we can work with them directly. The best place to come for information is on our website, so www.outdoorwatersolutions.com. We've got a lot of content. We've got some videos, a lot of information on our products. We also manufacture, the big fountains, so we can go up to 0.5 horsepower, 1 horsepower, 2s, 3s, 5s, and 7.5s. So with and without your light kits. So we've gotten a lot bigger in the fountain side of the business, and then we also sell, the beneficial microbes, the pond dyes, and a lot of other products as well. So we don't just do aeration. We're kind of a full line pond and lake marketing and manufacturing company. But we primarily try to sell through our elite dealer network.
Okay, so now let's just kind of rapid fire 6-shooter. Let's go through products. You've got windmills. Tell us about your windmill lineup. What do you have?
So on the windmills, we offer a really, really broad selection because a lot of people want to customize. So we do galvanized steel windmills, your traditional farm windmills. We do that 12-foot, 16-foot, 20-foot, 24-foot towers, head on top. And we basically can do either 3-legged or 4-legged because some people like 3-legged and some people like 4-legged. We also can powder coat every one of those. If you want to do Longhorn windmill.
No, we don't do that.
we can do any sports teams or customize it for somebody.
So you can customize. Put your school logo on there.
We do school logos.
Okay.
We do farm names. Like the Angry Beaver Ranch. We put their name on it. And then we do wood towers. So we have 16-foot pressure treated wood. The wood actually comes out of Texas. And then we put either galvanized head on, or we can custom powder coat the head. So we've got the broadest line, different of options as far as for the windmill side.
All right. Then what about the solar powered systems?
So solar, we've got a shallow water, which basically is up to 12 feet, direct drive system. We run 2 solar panels. A lot of our competitors just sell 1. So we went 2 on there because we want to be able to run early in the morning, later in the afternoon, and on cloudy days. So it's a direct drive system, say up to 12 feet. And then we've got a deep water solar system. So we could run it out here in this lake here at 30 or 40 feet. And it's using the same compressors that the electric systems use. So we've got a shallow water solar, a deep water solar, and then a battery backup solar, which will run almost in any situation.
Man, that's a pretty good lineup. What about fountains? Tell us about that part of your product lineup.
Well, we've been in the fountains now for, I guess this is our third or fourth year. We had some guys that were pretty passionate about fountains and designing and developing them. And we've got kind of a little bit different design than a lot of other companies out there. We're using a 100% stainless steel frame that we're mounting floats to and our lights to. And it's just, it's very user-friendly in that we have a pump and a motor combination. We're using Grundfos pumps and motors, so it's a very high-quality system. But what's great about it is if you had to work on it, let's say you're a fountain technician or you just needed to replace the pump or the motor, you don't have to drag it out of the water to work on it. You can physically go out, remove 4 bolts, lift it up, put the pump or motor back in, put a new one in, and drop it back down. So, you know, it's just very user-friendly. A lot of the fountains out there are great, but you have to physically take them out of the water, bring them to shore, and in a lot of cases you have to send them away to get rebuilt.
Okay.
Whereas ours, you can rebuild them on site. So it's just a lot more user-friendly.
Very cool. What are the products in the lineup?
We do microbial products. We have a couple good relationships with manufacturers that, so we do the muck pellets for the bottom to help break up some of that muck. So you can add aeration, but sometimes you may have 20 or 30, 40 years of muck down there that, you know, in some cases can be knee deep or deeper.
So the muck pellets, their job is to expedite the process.
Very
right?
Concentrated microbes, and in a pellet form, and we try to throw them into the high muck, high organic matter areas, and we're just trying to break that down quicker. So we have the muck pellets. We also have water-soluble bags or pouches of concentrated microbes. So if you're trying to, again, increase the aerobic activity in your pond from anaerobic, oxygen can help. But if you want to add supplemental aeration or microbes, about every 2 weeks we recommend. It just, again, increases the level of microbial activity in the pond. And then we do, you know, your standard liquid dyes, pond dyes. We do dry. And then we do, you know, some basic like lake rakes and cutters. We have some dock packages. So we've got a lot of different things that are, again, pond and lake related. And then we do sell some fish feeders. We have 3 different lines of fish feeders. We don't actually manufacture any of those ourselves, but we have 3 different lines we're carrying.
Outstanding. Boy, you've grown a whole lot since 2005 when you were figuring out how to make the wind blow to aerate a pond. That's great.
Yeah, we've added a lot of products, and you know, we've got a great team of people that can develop them and support them, and got a great tech hotline. So yeah, we're just happy to be in the business, and we've got some great elite dealers that we work through. So,
well, John Redd, thanks for your time today, folks. Thanks for listening and watching this. If you want more information about outdoor water solutions, go to outdoorwatersolutions.com. Also, be sure to check in at pondboss.com, our resource guide. They're listed in there as well. And don't forget about the Institute of Higher Pondology courses and curriculum out there. So there's a lot of resources at pondboss.com as well. So thanks for listening in. We appreciate your business. And if you need some help, send us an email. We'd be glad to help you. info@pondboss.com. Adios.
Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me how. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, let's do it now. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, you're the one that makes fishing so much fun. Well, hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what I need to raise a big old honking moss back. Line breaking, tack tearing up moss back. Hey, Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.